So you've heard the topic, keeping in touch with parishioners during COVID and beyond. This is a look at our Stewardship Commission, our project resource team. I'm Bob Fitzpatrick. You met Eva. Some of them are here tonight, some of them aren't. Who's here tonight? I see Mother Megan Thomas and Canon Phyllis Jones. Okay. Other people who we're working with to develop this program and others are Tina Aiken from St. David's Cranberry, Sergio Delgado from Christchurch, Crystal Ray Trenton, George Funk from Good Shepherd Pittman, Natalie Krauser from All Saints Scotch Plains, Father Chuck Messer from St. John's Salem City, Father William Ndishabandi from St. Augustine's Asbury Park, Shirley Thompson, also from St. Augustine's Asbury Park, and you. So this, does everybody know Project Resource does? Some of you were at our prior workshops, but we are the Stewardship Commission of the Diocese of New Jersey, and our commission, our apostolate, if you will, is to share spiritual, practical, and effective tools to express thanks for God's generosity and to fund the mission of God's church. You may see some of these people on tonight's and other nights' presentations or other workshops. We're working with your congregation one-on-one. So we're trying to make the names and the faces available. Next slide, please. We will have, this is a three-part series. Our session tonight is defining need. That is, what is it that you hope to do? What do you hope to get out of these workshops? And what is it you seek to do to keep in touch with members of your congregation? Our second session will be a week from tonight, also Tuesday at 7 p.m., strategies and tools. And session 3 will be a further workshopping of tools that you can apply and how to do follow-up. So some of the things we seek to address during these workshops: how is your congregation keeping in touch with parishioners during COVID and beyond? What strategies have been successful? What have you tried that didn't work? And sharing your stories of success and failure, success and struggle, is helpful to the church's community. Who in your congregation, who is still in touch, and who seems to have fallen off the face of the earth, and who's in between? And how do you know? How much of what you know is anecdotal, and how much of it is a little firmer in terms of data? Who in your congregation needs to hear that God still loves them and that their church misses them? Video was a big part of the learning curve once the original shutdown came exactly 2 years ago this week, and probably 2 years ago today. Video has been a huge help and was a big part of the learning curve for clergy and lay leaders. But who is not reached through video? What have you learned about that? What do you wonder about that? How do you know, and how do you keep track? As we go forward through these workshops, we're going to share ways to move beyond anecdotal information, to prioritize and improve connection as a way to acknowledge and build relationship. And we're going to help try and collect and share your stories of how you've kept in touch and what successes you've had, what struggles you've had, what you're experimenting with now. So that's an overview. Any questions on why we're here or what we hope to get into? Are there other things that you wish were on this list? Matches your hopes and expectations so far for what the topics will be? I'm seeing nods, quiet nods.
Good.
Eva, is this you?
Yep, this is me. So we'll start tonight by talking about what keeping in touch with members of your congregation means to you personally, not to your church, but to you personally, and explore what that means. And then we're going to explore where your church is as far as keeping in touch with its members. We'll touch briefly on what types of measures you might use and how you might evaluate how things are going. And then we'll dive into 2 case studies that we want to share with you. And then hopefully we get to hear a lot more from you in some breakout groups. So we'll break the attendees into smaller groups, and we'll talk about specifically successes and struggles that you've had. And we're going to use that to feed into sessions 2 and 3, so we can really focus in on things that you have brought up tonight that we can explore further in the 2 weeks to come. And we'll close with prayer. So let's start tonight by taking a few minutes to complete a series of 3 short polls. And again, the context of these questions that we're asking you to answer as you personally, not as your church, but what are your personal preferences in response to these 3 questions? So here's the first one. Take a few minutes to answer, and then we'll look at the results. Okay. Any surprises here to anyone?
Phone calls are higher than expected.
I'm curious what the other was. Was it a blend, or is there something new and exciting, or did I somehow miss that when it was shared?
I did see. Some people did handwritten notes, it looks like.
Okay.
Yeah, looks like in the chat.
That's nice.
I'm a little surprised by the heavy reliance on email over social media, but maybe that's just the age of folks you're trying to reach. I don't know.
So this is how we answered personally. I would imagine for other members of our congregations, they might have a different.
Right.
But okay, interesting. Oh, and then Todd said he unchecked it after he checked it for email. I hear you, Todd. Should we do the next poll? Okay. How do you most commonly find out what's going on in your church? And this is you personally. What were some of the other answers? Let's just see. Weekly service bulletins.
In church or as a church leader, announcements during worship, by attending weekly service, through ongoing weekly virtual book study group.
Nice, nice. Okay. Okay.
As a church leader, it's all on the church calendar or it doesn't exist. I then distill that into website, newsletter, bulletins, mailings, etc., to inform others.
Interesting. Okay, the third and final poll. What are the different ways you like to foster connection? Okay. I love coffee hours.
And in the chat was Wednesday prayer group.
Very nice.
As well as book study or Lenten devotions.
Any surprises here on these? Okay. So I think we have one more, it's more of an open-ended question for us to talk about, and maybe we'll use the chat since there are so many of us on, but let's talk about how is communicating different from fostering connection. If you can use the chat and just share some of your thoughts, and then maybe we'll scan through them and pick a few to explore a little further, or we'll take them for a future session.
Is this a question open now for conversation, Eva, or do you just want us to put notes in the chat?
Yeah, I wasn't sure how hard it would be for all of us to talk to this. Maybe we just share some in the chat and then we can pick a few or a common theme amongst them. Okay, let's just read through some of these. Communicating is broader. Connection implies personal touch. Communication is for the masses. Connection is mainly about relationship. I like that. Communication is informational. Evening Compline, media to communicate. Connection is a mutual, so it's almost bidirectional, right? Connection. Can be mailing sent out seasonally. Is there one that jumps out at somebody that you'd want to talk more about?
Joy's comment, communication is one way. If Joy would want to expand on that.
Yeah.
To me, communication is, like I would, say an announcement and give information out, where, developing a connection, is more like at a coffee hour to me, where, I talk to you, you talk to me, we talk about our kids, we talk about where we're going on vacation. It's more personal, and more about the person than just giving them information.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know for us, we were sort of surprised. We were doing so much communication at our church initially, and we weren't really seeing people respond. And I think people were struggling, obviously, with the situation with the pandemic. But I think that's when we realized that just communicating is insufficient, and that we have to somehow create opportunities for connection. And maybe it needs a new form of communication. But one new message here. Need communication to make connections. Absolutely right, Christy. I agree with you. So, Natalie, do you want to take it from here for the next slide?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Ava. And it's amazing to see how many people are on our Tuesday night session. I think it really speaks to the topic at hand, and that we're all looking for ways to connect with each other, to learn from each other. And so moving on to the next slide, we're going to talk about, how successful have we been at keeping in touch? I think from some of the poll responses and then the chat answers that it's already starting to give us some idea. But as you can see on this slide, we really wanted to give you some of the different ways that from a data standpoint that you would measure or evaluate how you're doing at keeping in touch. And the thing is, each one of us is in a different church, and our community is different, and the expectation is most likely different as well. So before we really jump into it, I didn't think anyone wanted to hear from us about all the different ways that we're doing that. It's like, which one of these are you doing? Are you maybe doing all of them? Weekly, do you perhaps get an update from a finance or a stewardship chair on where you are with your pledge campaign? Do you see what weekly attendance was on Sunday or Wednesday attendance? In terms of the email communication at All Saints, as was shared earlier, and a lot of the times, we'll poll a question that's either tied to our outreach ministry in our weekly email, or, just sort of ask for a chat on our Facebook group as well. We'll pose a question tied to the sermon or something similar in order to see where people are, if they were there, how do they feel? And that, of course, obviously starts to seed some other conversations. Much to Joy's point, communication is unidirectional, and connection is multidimensional. So if, feel free to put into the chat, you can raise your hand. I'll scroll through all my people so I can still see my slide. But if you are currently capturing data, and then we'll get to who's capturing it and where does it reside, any data at all as to any of these slides, feel free to put a thumbs up on your thing. You can do a thumbs up in the screen. You can shake your head. And then I'll also sort of check to see if I missed anyone who wanted to say something in the chat. And do feel free, if you want, unmute yourself and jump out with something phenomenal that you're doing, that you're tracking, and how that's going for you. Everybody don't answer at once. So who is doing this? Who is collecting data? Right now, today, whether it's checking to see how many of your emails got opened, seeing if a link got clicked on, reporting on attendance. Anybody?
Yeah, I think we all report on attendance, at least the clergy do.
Okay.
Because
Mhm.
that
And are you-
goes in the book. And
Yeah.
so we are counting in person, and the difficult number is how many people may be participating virtually.
Mm.
We can sort of tell, but
Mhm.
then there are people who aren't in sync with the congregation in the sanctuary. They're watching later, either later on Sunday or later in the week.
So they're
And I know
watching
about
that.
that.
Okay, so they're
Yeah.
watching a
Yeah.
recording. So maybe Sunday morning at 9:30 or 10 no longer works for them after a year of JAMA service, is what you're saying?
So they don't want to be in person because of health issues. We
Okay.
have some of those, or because they've enjoyed being at home and watching later. So we do Facebook Live, which then, of course, is recorded. It's available on Facebook, but then I also post it on our YouTube channel. And I can see
Absolutely.
how many people watch, although I don't know how many distinct individuals that is. So if 30 people watch sometime during the week, is it the same person going back every day? I don't know. I just don't know.
One, if that person's going back every day, you're right. I think that's sort of amazing.
That would be kind of weird.
Well, maybe they're gleaning something different from each time. And you're right. That's like when you can really drill down into the data, depending upon, YouTube. Sometimes, I mean, it depends upon, I think, which version of it you're using. You can see unique identifiers and all of that. At some point, even I do like data. Don't get me wrong. You don't want to also be obtrusive, because then what do you do with that information? I saw also, and we do the same thing at All Saints, right? So we Facebook live stream our Sunday service and our Wednesday services. We record them, right? So you can, visit on YouTube later should you so want to. And actually, our junior warden captures in-person attendance, and then he offers a Zoom update. And so sort of says, if he knows the household from which they're originating, he'll actually extrapolate out, 3 people perhaps.
How many people were there? Yeah.
Yeah, right. So all of
Yeah,
a sudden
I
you're getting
know.
some of that pass along type of thing that you're also referring to. I think honestly, it's good because you are everywhere for people when they want to be. A lot of the time, your most success is connecting with people when they're ready to listen and to hear. So I honestly, I think it's great that you guys are doing that. I love seeing also too some of the comments in the chat that Stephanie shared, that they count also too, much like you, Reverend Megan, people in church, people on YouTube, all the different services. All of a sudden, we're all mathematicians counting over here. And then I saw, that's interesting too. So congrats everyone, right? Like the 30% open email, that's above and beyond best practice rates, just so you know. Obviously, then the next step, and this sort of drills down into who owns that data. Does somebody click on a link, or does somebody take an action afterwards, right? But then Todd, you have some interesting thing in here too, because you're saying your newsletter data is not useful, and that you're working through a similar process this Lent as you did last year to reach out to people if you haven't seen them recently. So you're not only taking data, you're also taking theoretically the lack of data or your distrust of the data, and then, sort of extending on and really making connections possible. Did you want to share that Lenten project with us as to what you're doing and how that is moving forward for you?
It's moving a little bit slowly this year, but
Okay.
it was.
Well, we're not
it was.
not that far into Lent. You still have time.
That's right. Last year, as we were, I forget if locked down or just emerging, and life was crazy, and so that was when I was very concerned to contact people that I hadn't seen in person recently. We'd been meeting outdoors, and that just didn't work for a lot of folks, and so trying to make that personal connection once in a while. And so a lot more people are showing up these days, and we're pretty steady in lots of ways, but there's still people who haven't left the house. And so, I continue to follow up. I have just a list of the people that I would expect to see. And if I haven't, then they're worth checking in with.
And so during these check-ins, are these phone, are they email, are they Zoom? And are you
Sorry,
sort of
yes.
spreading the wealth so it doesn't all fall on you?
Oh, that's a good question. So this particular exercise is just me. And so it's, a pastoral check-in via telephone. Most of the people that are in this category are in it because they don't do Zoom. However, early in the pandemic, I did get with my vestry leaders and we created a phone tree. And that happened for well over a year, where everybody would get at first a weekly phone call from somebody else in the parish. And then, we scaled it back some. And these days, I think it's petered out. But for probably 18 months, people would get a call at least every other week from somebody else in the parish.
That's nice.
I think that's amazing. And you put us to shame, because early on, our vestry was doing calls. We did not make a year by any stretch of the imagination. Maybe 90 days. I'm going to guess, but I don't want to speak out of turn. Maybe it was just me who sort of started to slack off. So with that too, the second part of this, before we also want to move on, it sounds as though we definitely, I think, are keeping in touch in a way that's not just pushing out information. Obviously, to Todd's point, actively seeking to revitalize that connection and meet our parishioners where they are. I loved hearing from, Reverend Megan about just how do you then find them if there's no way to glean from that data. And then the next thing really would be is to, not be hard on yourself. Like, I love the chat about 30% clicking on and opening, because again, it's above and beyond industry best practices. But then what's next? So if you are doing that level of data digging, and say I click on a link about joining a food pantry ministry, if you don't see me for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, does someone then reach out to me? And I think that also, and it's just a question for a thought, feel free to share in the chat any more about that. But as we move into like, what does success mean? It's easy for us to have all this data and sometimes get bogged down in it. So I also would say, like, yes, it's important to measure it, because if you don't measure it, you don't know what's happening. But I wouldn't necessarily say, let's identify like a goal for each one of these until you have a chance to do one of them well. And that was sort of my example, because I liked the constant contact open rates. It looks like people are doing things. But if for some reason, whether they click on a link or if you're in person and they raise their hand and say, can I be a part of this? And then they don't, who reaches out and how do you follow up? And I think that then gets into the different ways of communication. Oh, Todd also added something else. Hold on 1 second. Let me check my chat. So, okay. And so thank you, Reverend Megan, too. In 2020, we were good. 2021, people had given up. Maybe they were tired. Thank you for, accommodating me. But also too, you guys also sort of pivoted into worshiping outside when you could. So you were offering people other options. And so that's a balance as well. And then very good point. You're right. Surveys, if you're going to ask something, you then need to follow up. What do you do with that information? So if you're asking to find out how many people would be willing to participate at 6:30 on Saturday morning for a food pantry, and you hear back from 5 people, you do need to then follow up with those 5 people, talk to them about, is there training? What's the expectation? Who can attend? And then hopefully through those answers, start to build that group. Obviously, in surveying, you also want to make certain that whatever you're asking, you can follow through on. So not only taking that data and using it as a connection point, but then what happens next? It's supposed to be the opening of a conversation and not just an item that you're saying, let me do that to stay in touch. Is there, before we move on, because I also always want to be cognizant of time, is there anything that sticks out to you that you did that maybe isn't on this list, or any way that we can also help you define, what success might look like for you in terms of using some of these reportings and then eventually connecting them? And that, I think, to Megan's point of connecting attendance, if your attendance goes up, does your plate collection goes up? if your attendance goes up, does it go down? And sort of starting to look to see over 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, can you discern any trends? And are there any things that you can also do, as a parish, as a lay leader, to impact those? Are there people missing? Do you reach out to them? It's this ongoing connectivity that I think Joy really brought out well at the beginning. It's not one time, it's not one way, it's really fostering that connection.
I see Lisa has her hand up too. I don't, Lisa, did you have a question or comment?
Lisa, did you have a question or comment?
I do. I just want to say we're actually actively looking for a new priest. And we sent out a lot. Yeah. Congratulations. We sent out a lot of surveys, and I was astounded to see the number of return envelopes we got. And every time we do stewardship, and whenever we're on phone call, we ask for updated information. But the problems that we're having also now with phone calls is that we have landlines which people don't answer, and we don't necessarily have cell phone lines. We're still in contact with a lot of people, various different ways, but there's still a whole group out there that you wonder, where are they? What's going on? Why, we can't get in touch with them, but.
So in terms of that, and I'm happy to talk to you too offline. So one, I have a landline and I have a mobile, and to be fair, I probably don't answer either of them very frequently. So that's just me. I'm not, representative of anyone but myself, I would say. So sometimes, and my recommendation is, some people would tell you school of thought is to leave a message, say, I'm checking in on you. I hope you're doing well. I really wanted to get your thoughts back.
We leave a message. We send emails. I mean, we do as much as we possibly can do. And
there are still some people missing.
Do what you have to do.
We ran into that, I think, in 2020, right? Like, it's never a perfect thing. So then you start to get into who's doing the data update, who connects with them. I like to then look at it as, so it's not just coming, and Evelyn and Jamie, feel free to cut me off, but it's not just coming then from the church leadership. Who else in your congregation knows the person who's missing really well, or knows the person whose mail is coming back, return to sender, or doesn't answer their phone, and see who else with whom they have a relationship and where that connection is. And possibly just say, hi, like, Maria, I wasn't able to get a hold of Lisa, and I really want to get her feedback on this because this will impact her and her relationship with the church. Are you able to have her contact us, or do you want to pass this along to her? And then this way you're utilizing their peer and their friend network to pass along this information, obviously with the hopes then that because it's coming from, a friend in a slightly different manner, that then you'll get that new information you need, and perhaps even the answer.
I think we do that. And it goes from one friend to another connection to another connection. And sometimes you actually do find people that way.
We lost track of someone, and we did get them back, and she's a mom of 2 girls, and we're thrilled to have her back, just for the natural evolution that she would want to grow a family with the church. It's never, I think my other question would be, how many, when you say we got a bunch of unopened envelopes, like, what's the percentage of your overall parish list? And are they people that represent a certain group for you? Like, start to also look at it, because then you can prioritize who do you want to do the second round of outreach to. And at the end of the day, not everybody has as many resources as we'd like. If it's 5, it's really easy. If it's 10, if it's 25, all of a sudden, it starts to sort of grow an exponential interaction that you need to do.
We're working on it.
I know you are. I'm looking forward to hearing about when you have, secured and called that new rector.
Yeah.
Lisa, I heard what you said about the parish list, and for example, when you did surveys and there were a lot of returns. And by returns, I don't think you meant responses to the survey, but mail that
No.
mail that bounced
Returned
back.
envelopes. Yes, returned
Unopened.
envelopes. But then
Okay.
you're also going by, I don't know what other parishes do, but I mean, we have a mailing list of quote families that are on the mailing list, not necessarily active families in the parish.
Yeah.
At the active families in the parish, we probably, I'm going to go out on a limb and say a good 95 to 98% back, because believe me, they want you to know what they think. It's the other people that somehow or other have disappeared, and you just don't know where they went. And sometimes it's alarming, because it's like, well, they've always lived there before. Where are they now? And other times you kind of know what's happened, but you go out on a limb and you try to find things out. We do have a phone call system. We have a phone tree. We're pretty good about reaching out to people. But it was just so alarming to see the number of return envelopes.
There is good news. There is good news in that. And that is that if you keep those envelopes and you create a feedback loop, you can update your list so that it doesn't happen again.
Exactly.
And you know, we have some exercises and some examples throughout these workshops that are planned. And some of it is sort of, you know, parish list acrobatics, high level stuff. Pretty ambitious, but we've seen it work. It's good stuff. But one of the things that we talked about as we developed this is maybe we should start with the question of, how do you know that your parish list is trustworthy enough to use? And how do you feel about purging your list during a search process, during COVID, a pandemic? How much of a rush are you to thin out that list? Do you have an administrative process that takes those envelopes that bounce back to get the parish list updated, whether that's in the register book, in the spreadsheet, in the mailing labels? You know, do you have a process for that? Who's in charge of that? Who provides the labor for that? And there's some really basic things about how much does our list deserve to be trusted, and how are we good stewards of our parish lists that we're going to look at in this workshop and next week.
Right.
At that point, Father Bob, and in the interest of time, do you want to talk about, do you want to jump ahead and talk a little bit about the mapping experiment you guys are doing at Grace Episcopal?
Yeah, and I'll be short. I'm starting an experiment at Grace Episcopal Church in Merchantville, where I'm the rector. And it's still kind of loose, but I want to run it past this group, tell you what I'm attempting, see what you think of it. And if you've had any suggestions on how I might go forward or hone this or apply this or build on it, I would be open to that feedback. But first, a brief description. I've been here 2 years. I started in February 2020. I was with these good people at Grace Merchantville 6 Sundays before we shut down the building for COVID. So thank God for those 6 Sundays, but it's been a weird 2 years to start as a new pastor. So we've got a pretty good parish list, and people have been very helpful about updating it. And the parish secretary, I named her as registrar, parish registrar. She's the keeper of the list. Nobody goes on or off without my initials on it, but she's the keeper of the list. So it's an assigned role. And based on that, we've got a pretty good parish directory and a pretty good parish mailing list. But one of the things that I realized is that when I pray over the parish list, and I do pray over the parish list, and when we do mailings, there are about 200 families on the Grace Merchantville parish list. What I came to realize is that I recognized about 100 of the names, and I don't know the other 100 of the names. And some of that is the pandemic. You know, it's quite possible that out of the 100 families I have not met or whose names I do not recognize, it's entirely possible that even without COVID, I wouldn't know 50 of those 100. But I don't know which 50. And that bugs me. And I want to know everybody in the parish. So what I did was I took the parish list, which is in fairly good shape, and I asked all the vestry members, a whole bunch of ministry leaders, people who do and do not have titles, but who are lay leaders in the parish, and then a whole bunch of new people as well, and asked them to take a copy of the parish directory and answer one question. Do I know this family? And if the answer is no, I have no idea who any of them are, mark it a 0. If you as the respondent could say, yes, I know at least one member of that household, I know who they are, no more than that, mark it 1. And if I have ever spoken to anybody from that family, anything from, oh yes, we go on vacation together every year, to I remember a very pleasant or even unpleasant conversation at coffee hour in 2006, I have spoken to that person, mark it 2. Any kind of contact at all. And I call this the identification phase. And I'll then be able to mark those into the same Excel spreadsheet where the list is. And I'll have a column for each respondent, each vestry member, each newcomer, each ministry leader, and there's 0s, 1s, and 2s for each family in the list. And what I can do then is go down and say, who of these families are well known by a wide range of people or a narrow range of people? Who among the people who responded, the vestry members, the newcomers, the lay leaders, knows a lot of people, knows a few people, and it begins to take me into what I call, kind of crudely, but the basics of relationship mapping. Who's known, who's active, what are the networks within it? Now, it's a very small number of people marking them up, so it would be possible to overuse this data, but it's still beginning to give me a good picture of who knows who, and just as importantly, who is not known on the parish list. You know, it's sort of a step beyond the envelope came back. They still get the envelopes, delivered, but we haven't heard from them maybe in years, maybe even well past my short 2 years here. What I'm trying to do is create a better understanding for myself of who really is part of the parish, who's being reached and who's not, who's known and who's not. And if I sum up those 0s, 1s, and 2s, I may be able to create groups, or I call them cohorts, for how well known or visible someone has been at Grace Church. And that can be the basis for an outreach, or I call it in-reach strategy, a communication strategy. Do they get a customized version of the Easter letter with a mention of, so glad you've been active throughout COVID. Sorry, we haven't seen you. I'd love to talk to you by phone or in person. Can we create communication and outreach strategies to work on those relationships? It's a little crude. It's in its early stages. It's a little ham and egg, but that's something I'm trying here. Do you have any questions on what I described? First, fairly straightforward. How do you think I could use the results that I'm getting back from people, these 0s, 1s, and 2s? What do you think this teaches me? What do you think this won't teach me? Any thoughts?
I would definitely reach out to the 1s and 2s.
And what would you say to the 1s and 2s? And how would it be different from the 0s? And it doesn't have to be just Lisa, but how would you reach out differently to the 1s and 2s, people who had a little bit more, showed up on more radar, if you will, compared to the 0s that had very low profile? What would you say that would be different, or how would you communicate with them, or by what means would you communicate with them? What would you say that would be different?
I would basically just do an introductory, hey, I'm Bob Fitzpatrick, rector of Grace in Merchantville, and I'm reaching out to people I don't know, trying to get to know you.
So
Or
just
something
start with the
like that.
basics. I'd like to get to know you. I'm the still relatively new rector here. I'd like to get to know you. Just start with the very simple basics. Thank you. Other thoughts? If you had access to this information, what would you do with it? What would be one thing you would do?
I guess one question that I had, Bob, because I'm not sure if I heard this right when you started your description of the process. Is this something that only you did, or do you also, because when you're talking about capturing the wisdom of the community, do you also have your other congregational leaders do the same thing with this list?
Yes.
Okay.
I gave it to all vestry members, and roughly 2/3 responded. Had to ask a few times, but out of 12 or 15 people, we got, I don't know, 9 or 10. And I could chase down the others. And then I began to give it to people who were ministry leaders, and gave it to a bunch of people. We've met a lot of new people in the last 2 years. We met probably 45 people last year, and we met another 20 this year. So I intentionally asked them this question as well, because one of the things I realized is that when COVID is over, this is not going to be the same congregation, both for newcomers who have had a year or two to integrate into life here, and longtime members who we haven't seen in 2 years. And there's a new pastor who they don't recognize yet. So I've intentionally asked a mix of people, titled and untitled leaders, and included newcomers on purpose. I've got my own thing about my own observations. Who do I see at worship? Who do I see at outreach, at fellowship? My observations of participation. But that's a little bit different, and on top of what I'm asking of lay leaders to do with the 0s, 1s, and 2s.
And thanks for that. The reason I was asking is because I was thinking also that what you get out of this exercise is also an understanding of which one of your lay leaders know a lot of people.
Yes.
Who are your connected lay leaders, and
Yes.
who are the ones that so who can help you, with
Yes.
a lot of these communications.
Yes, we can do, I call it doing the rows, working both axes of the chart. The rows are which families have a high radar presence, and then the columns are which lay leaders know a lot of people. And I think both pieces of information are valuable and actionable.
Yeah. So I see that Chris,
scientific, but there is something on both the rows and the columns.
I see that Christy had her hand up. Christy, you want to go ahead?
Christy McGuire.
Yes, hi. I'm at St. Francis in Dunellen, and I'm curious about looking at this from the flip side, where we have, like, our leadership core, we have a lot of people who do a lot of stuff. So it's like the same people, you see this one in outreach and this one on stewardship, and it's the same people. So I think there's a lot of people who recognize and know, the leaders from their participation in the church, but the leaders don't know them. So it's kind of the flip side of, well, you're asking me about, I'd like to get to know you. And I'm thinking, yeah, I see you every week and you're always talking about this, that, and the other thing. So is there any kind of disconnect, like, between, the people who might know more than you think? I mean, how do you capture that?
I'm not sure I understand your question yet.
Oh, sorry.
What's the I want to specifically, what is the disconnect you're looking at? Because that sounds like it's the heart of your question.
Yeah, it's that people who might know you, but you don't know them.
Me as clergy.
Well, no, just in general, like one of the parish,
okay.
Like one of the parish leaders.
Yeah.
And you ask that parish leader, hey, do you know Joe and his family? And the leader may say, oh, no, I'm not familiar with them. But then Joe knows you from everything you've been doing in the church, and you've chatted with him at coffee hour, but he didn't remember that. So it's kind of like, I don't want people to feel like nobody's paying attention to them.
Yeah.
like,
Right.
Yeah. I have not attempted any of that two-way part of this. I'm in the early stages of this, and even this is a bit of an experiment. But I do see what you say about, do members of the parish know each other, and do lay leaders know members of the congregation, and vice versa. And that, my experiment does not capture that, but it's a fair question. It's a good question.
Thank you.
I see Todd has.
I think that is a good question, because you wouldn't want people to feel like they're in a second tier because they're not. Some people don't want to be as involved. And, I think for everyone's spiritual journey, right, they might want to be on some sort of outer ring periphery and then work their way in.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is great to get this data. I love this idea, but I see what you're saying, that you have to be careful how to use it.
Yeah, and I don't publish any of this. This is
right
in the office, pastoral and communications exercise. This never gets published. And it's very subjective. And you're right, people would likely see themselves as judged, or they could, and that's not really true, but that feeling may be almost inevitable in if we published it. I do not recommend that, as you say. This is a pastoral and administrative exercise.
I see Todd's had his hand up for a while. Todd?
Hey, I was actually thinking the same thing that Christine and Father Bob were just talking about. I think these numbers you're going to get back are going to be, if not exactly, strongly indicative of people's participation. And there are tiers of participation. And that's not a negative judgment on someone, but as we each approach church, we each use it, might be a hard word to say, but we're each getting different things out of it, right? And there are some for whom just kind of a surfacey, Christmas and Easter, or not even that much, is feeding where they are in their spiritual journey right now. And then there are gradations all the way down the line. And I think that the higher the number in your map is going to suggest that someone is more engaged, more known, and they're going to be the people, if you don't already know them, whom you do need to get to know the most, because they are the most invested and they do probably want and need some attention. And so, yeah, I would definitely target with this data, target my phone calls, starting with the highest numbers and working my way outwards, because I think the people who have the highest number are likely the people most interested in hearing from their new rector.
Yeah, I agree. And that I've tried to do that through this exercise and others over the last 2 years. But and I feel pretty good about the people I'm seeing ones and twos on. The next step is what to do about the people who are not showing up on the radar. And the people who are ones and twos, who are very high profile, I think, I should say, that's a very good predictor of who's very active, very high participation. Those are the people I actually try and meet with regularly. And some of you are familiar with the Barnabas questions. What are you celebrating? What are you struggling with? What's the next thing you want to do with that? How can I help you? How can I pray for you? Those kind of more in-depth conversations. Those I prioritize there. Other hands up?
Could I just pitch in a little bit?
Yeah.
Just the idea that, if people are coming up as all zeros, I have people who ask to be on my mailing list and don't want anything else. Mm-hmm. I mean, they'll be friendly if I encounter them, but they don't want any other interaction, and they just want to be on the mailing list, so they're in the know, and so they're happy to be left to do their thing, and we're open to them increasing their engagement at some point.
Yeah, I'm interested truly in mapping, and pastorally, for spiritual formation, for congregational development over time, where people want to move closer to higher levels of participation, their spiritual needs are changing. I consider it central to my ministry that I want to learn that and help them with that. This really is mapping sort of a snapshot of the status quo with no judgment, because people, there are many concentric rings in any group, certainly in a church, and it's okay. Growing up, I didn't go to church. Christmas and Easter, some years not. But I still remember feeling like I was part of the church and this was my church. So no matter which concentric ring they're in terms of activity level or engagement level, no judgment.
The only other thing I just wanted to add really quickly before we move on, because I know we need to, is that, it strikes me that, in the instance that Todd was just talking about, that if you were answering that question, that person would probably be a 1 on your list, because at least you know enough about them to know that that's what they want, which means that you have had at least that much contact with them. And you do know at least one person, that person that you had contact with. But if you have people who are truly like zeros on the list, like nobody, and especially if there's zeros, for all or the overwhelming majority of the lay leaders that are participating in this exercise, then, for me anyway, at least at some point in time, the question would arise, why? Why are they like not known by anybody? And what, I think I would want to reach out to them, perhaps with a different kind of question, depending upon, what their status is as far as, are they even still members? I mean, are they even still around? But if they are, and it's just that nobody has heard from them in forever and a day, I would want to just reach out to them, just to try to make the connection and find out if there's, something that the church could be doing that would engage them more, and this kind of goes back to a pet peeve of mine. It's just that, we're so good at, especially with new people coming in, saying, oh, we want to get you involved in this, or this, all the different things that we do as a congregation. And a lot of times we don't stop to ask them, what are their passions? What do they want to get involved with? What are we maybe not doing that they would want to get involved with? And so sometimes I think we need to just pay attention to the people who have disengaged for whatever reason, to see if there are, if there's some life there in other ways. But I know we have to move on. I just didn't want to leave that stone unturned.
Yeah, thank you, Phyllis. Thank you for your discussion of this. Thank you for the discussion on this, and my comments took more time than we originally allocated. Thank you. This exercise may not be for everybody, but you can see the kind of questions and the why of this as you go into your own ministry. If you want to borrow this experiment, that's fine, but finding your why and then your how, I hope can come from this. We're near the end of our time. Are you willing to do this short exercise that will help shape next week's discussion, because we have a chance to hear from you about some things you want to look into over the next 2 sessions?
Father Bob, I think in the interest, just to respect everyone's time, that instead of doing the breakout, maybe we just ask the emails on the screen right now. If we can just ask everyone on here to just email the resource email a struggle, success, a question, or 1 of 3, 2 of 3. If you have 3 of 3, fantastic. But that way we'll kind of collect these responses and it'll help us inform the next 2 sessions. Because we are at 8:02, so I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. And I think we've had a really great discussion as a group, and that's a testament to just the participation and everything that's happening, so that it would be, that's why we kind of went over time, and that's totally fine. So I think that's great.
And maybe we can also keep the chat open after we just give a preview of next week's session, so that anyone that doesn't want to send the email can just stay on the chat after and just type it now, so it's not on their to-do list. Is that an okay option as well?
Yeah. If anyone wants to, if you have it handy, a struggle, success, and or a question, you want to type in the chat right now, we're going to save the chat. So that's true. But I see like Christine posted that she would like to consult her committee, and I think that's a great idea as well. So please feel free to email us.
Great. So maybe we'll just, yeah, I think that. Oh, and Christy's asking for the deadline. What do we say? Today is Tuesday.
End of the week?
Maybe like the end of Thursday?
End of Thursday, yeah.
Great. Okay, can we just go ahead to for next week so I can give a quick preview? So for next week, we're really going to start diving deeper in one. We want to share what we hear back from you as far as struggles, successes, and questions. We're going to try to shape some of the things that we do in the next 2 sessions around that. We also want to really dive into what do you do with your parish list? How do you start from there? And what steps can you take from your parish list to encourage greater church participation? Then there's the topic of, well, we started with COVID church, but then somewhere along the line, it became pajama church. And we're kind of up against that in some ways. And there's Zoom fatigue, and there are people that want to continue to shelter in place. And how do we re-engage them? Maybe they have needs that we're not aware of because we're not able to reach them. So we want to dig into how do we combat that fatigue and some of the things we're up against as we come out of the pandemic for most people. Also, let's talk a little bit about what you've experienced as far as your ministries. A number of ministries, I know in my church, went on hold, but we're starting to try to restart some of them, or we've reshaped them, or there have been new ministries that have formed that might continue. So I think there's a real opportunity for this group and anyone else in your church that you want to invite to come to next week's session to really talk about and share ideas around ministries, fellowship opportunities, formation opportunities that we can learn from one another that might work in our respective congregations. And then finally, how do we celebrate the talents, the spiritual gifts of the people in our congregation, and use that as a way to celebrate the engagement and reforming our community of faith. So we're hoping you'll come next week. We have some very interesting things coming up, and you'll definitely feed into that with your ideas as well. So anything to close out? Do we want to close in prayer tonight? Yeah, thank you for putting that up. I pulled out a prayer I can close us with, if that's all right with everyone.
Please.
Gracious God, you call us to live a transformed and transforming life. Grant us the gifts we need so that we might fulfill your call. Thank you for bringing us together to share with one another for this past hour. We pray for clarity of purpose in our daily life and work, for patience with ourselves and others, and the perseverance in our struggles, for courage and compassion, for a spirit of collaboration and cooperation in our relationships, for renewed joy and a spirit of creativity and wonder. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone, for participating tonight.
Thanks so much, everybody.
everyone.